Good morning and welcome to this week's Sunday service at Oakham Baptist Church. If you're new to the church, I'm Zach. This is my son James. This is my wife Jennifer.
Sophia.
And this is Stig of the Dump.
Sophia.
No.
Hello,
this is Sophia. This morning, Lorraine Harper will be bringing us the prayers and the communion. Tim will be doing the readings, and I believe there'll be the return of Felttip Tim as well. And my wife Jennifer will be bringing us a message. We hope you enjoy and you're blessed by the service today.
Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, your perfect love is casting out fear. And even when I'm caught in the middle of the storms of this life, I won't turn back, I know you are near, and I will fear no evil. God is with me, and if my God is with me, whom then shall I fear? Whom then shall I fear? Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go. That is coming for the heart that holds on, a glorious light beyond all compare. And there will be an end to these troubles, but until that day comes, we'll live to know you here on the earth. I will fear no evil, for my God is with me, and if my God is with me, whom then shall I fear? Whom then shall I fear? Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go. You never let go of me. And I can see a light that is coming for the heart that holds on. There will be an end to these troubles, but until that day comes, still I will praise you. Still I will praise you. Yes, I can see a light that is coming for the heart that holds on. And there will be an end to these troubles, but until that day comes, still I will praise you. Still I will praise you. Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go in every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go.
Hello, Felttip Tim here again. It's nice to see you all. This week I've been asked to tell you a story that's very similar to one that Jesus told. Jesus told a story about a rich man and a shrewd manager that worked for him. You'll get to hear that story in a little while, but my story is much more exciting. It's a story that's all about mammoths and anteaters. The first person in our story is a big mammoth. Here she is. She's called Sally Alice, and she's big and strong, as you can see. The second character is a much smaller mammoth. Here she is, and she's called Minnie. Then there are the three anteaters, of course. Here they are. They're called Monty, Toast, and Yorkie. Now we've met all the characters, we're ready to start the story. Here comes Sally Alice on a lovely sunny day. Let's say hello to her. Hello, Sally Alice. Now, Sally Alice had one thing that she loved, and that was tomatoes. She loved to collect tomatoes and would always make sure she got some in her fridge. Today, Sally Alice has lots of tomatoes. Look, she's got a big pile of them here, and she's pushing them home to keep them safe before she can get time to eat them. Sally Alice was very strong, so she used her strength to help the other animals that lived near her. When they needed anything doing, the animals would ask Sally Alice to help, and she would do the work in return for a payment of tomatoes. The harder the work, the more tomatoes she would be paid. This made Sally Alice very happy, but there was so much work to do that she got very busy with it all. So she asked her friend Minnie to help her to collect the tomatoes that the other animals owed to her. One sunny day, Sally Alice did a job for one of the anteaters. Monty wanted a patio in his garden, and so he asked Sally Alice to move the big bricks that were needed to make it. It was quite heavy work, but Sally Alice managed to move the bricks into place. Monty was really pleased with the patio. It meant he had a great view out of his garden. Sally Alice remembered to tell Minnie that she had agreed a price of 10 tomatoes that Monty would pay her for all of that heavy work. Later on that day, Sally Alice went to see Toast, another of the anteaters. He asked Sally Alice to help him to move a big tree in a heavy plant pot into the middle of his garden. Toast loved the tree, and he wanted to be able to enjoy it in the sunshine in the garden. Sally Alice managed to move it across the garden to the middle without too much trouble. Toast thought the tree was in a great place in the garden, and he really loved it in its new position where the tree and Toast could share a sunny afternoon together. Sally Alice agreed a price of 8 tomatoes for this work for Toast. The last job of the day was for Yorkie, the smallest anteater. He wanted Sally Alice to carry a heavy bucket of water across the garden and pour it onto the biggest flower that he had, which was blooming with big pink flowers in the middle of the garden. Sally Alice picked up the bucket with her trunk and carried it easily across the garden and tipped it into the flower pot. Yorkie was really pleased and said he would be very happy to pay Sally Alice 6 tomatoes for all of her hard work. Sally Alice was quite tired at the end of the day after all her hard work, and so she asked Minnie to go and collect the tomatoes that she was owed by Monty, Toast and Yorkie. Sally Alice was careful to tell Minnie that she'd worked really hard on a very hot day, and so she wanted to make sure that Minnie collected every last tomato that she was owed, as she had earned them. So off Minnie went to find the anteaters and collect the money, and Sally Alice had a well-earned drink of juice. Meanwhile, Look what the naughty anteaters were doing. They were so hungry at the end of the day that they decided to have a feast and eat some of the tomatoes that were going to be for Sally Alice. By the time Minnie got there, they'd eaten nearly all of the tomatoes. Whatever was Minnie going to do? She needed to get the tomatoes for Sally Alice because she knew that the big mammoth would be very angry if she'd worked all day and then didn't get her tomatoes. She thought carefully and decided on a sneaky plan. She went to see Monty first and discovered that he didn't have 10 tomatoes, he only had 7. So Minnie said, "Don't worry, Monty, give me 7 tomatoes and I'll tell Sally Alice that you paid your debt." So Minnie took only 7 tomatoes for Sally Alice. When she sees Toast, he only has 5 tomatoes instead of the 8 that he promised to pay. But Minnie says the same thing to him. "Don't worry, Toast, you give me the 5 tomatoes and I'll tell Sally Alice that you paid up okay." So Minnie took 5 tomatoes for Sally Alice. Finally, Minnie went to see Yorkie, who only had 4 tomatoes instead of the 6 that he owed. I bet you know what happened here, don't you? Yes, Minnie said to Yorkie, "It's okay, give me the 4 tomatoes you have and I'll tell Sally Alice that you paid her for watering the flowers." So that's what they did, and Minnie took 4 tomatoes for Sally Alice. Then Minnie took the tomatoes back to Sally Alice, and that was when she was really clever. She piled all the tomatoes she'd collected from the anteaters into a big pile and pushed them all to Sally Alice's house. When Sally Alice saw them, she was really happy. She'd never seen such a big pile of tomatoes. "Wow," she said. "What a great job, Minnie. Did you get all of the tomatoes that I was owed?" "No," said Minnie. "They didn't have the right amount. But I thought that you loved tomatoes so much that you would rather have a great big pile to eat and not worry too much about the right amount." "You're right," said Sally Alice. "You were clever to work out that I love tomatoes so much that I wouldn't be mad about not getting the right amount if I just got a huge pile of them." So Minnie went home happily, and Sally Alice set about eating the tomatoes while they were still juicy and ripe. The end. Hello, Real Tim here this time. I hope you enjoyed that slightly surreal reimagining of the parable that Jesus told about the shrewd manager from Luke chapter 16. Now, before Jen preaches to us on this passage, it falls to me to read it from the Bible so that you can see exactly how Jesus told this parable rather than one using stop frame animation. So I'm going to read from Luke chapter 16 verses 1 to 15. Jesus told his disciples, "There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer.' The manager said to himself, 'What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses.' So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' 900 gallons of olive oil,' he replied. The manager told him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly and make it 450. Then he asked the second, 'And how much do you owe?' 1,000 bushels of wheat,' he replied. He told him, 'Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all of this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight."
The reading that we have just heard is one of, if not the, most confusing and controversial parables in the Bible, causing much debate and disagreement between theologians, scholars and church leaders, with varying interpretations. Now, first of all, we should say this. Don't worry, we're not going to go completely left field here and start suggesting that we should be swindling our way through life. And while there is still disagreement about parts of that parable, there are still some challenging lessons that we can take that we can be more certain of. So the parable tells a story about a steward who is employed to manage his rich employer's belongings, carrying out investments and generally managing his affairs. He's caught out mismanaging this by his boss, and so he fires him for being dishonest at worst, or perhaps he was just lazy and incompetent at best. Now, as his last task, he has to bring the accounts to his boss, but before he does, he comes up with a cunning plan. He speaks to the debtors and he reduces their debts. Now, these are not insignificant reductions. The first man has his debt reduced by 450 gallons of olive oil, which is the equivalent of a year and a half's wages. The second man's debt is 1,000 bushels of wheat, and that's the equivalent of 9 years' wages, and that gets reduced by 20%. The steward says that he does this in order that, when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. Now, it's likely that in these times that the steward also lived with his master, as he was also about to be made homeless. He's also not a young man anymore, and he'll find other types of work quite difficult. So he's worried for his future without this job. So to provide for himself, he ingratiates himself with the debtors so that they will perhaps give him employment and or accommodation when he is fired. So far, this is quite clear. The last part of the parable, however, is where it starts to get confusing. On first reading of this passage, it appears that Jesus is suggesting that dishonesty is to be rewarded, something that goes against everything else that we read and know from the Bible. In verse 8, it states that the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. But this doesn't make sense. Why would the rich employer commend his employee for effectively telling all his debtors that they don't need to pay him back everything that they owe to him? Now, there are several reasons put forward for why the manager might praise the steward for reducing the debt, but the one that makes the most sense is what the steward actually did, is to reduce his commission off the debt. So, in this context, the steward was likely to earn his wages by charging a fee to the debtor on top of the original debt, rather than being paid by the master. Now, that doesn't seem quite fair to us because it's not how things work now, and it's how it worked then. So by reducing his fee, everybody wins. The master still gets what is owed to him. The debtor gets to pay back less money. Both the master and the steward are probably looked on quite favourably by these people in debt. And the steward, even though he's given up some commission, he's done it to benefit from it later. And it is that clever solution that is then commended by his master, and it appears by Jesus too. Jesus then says in verse 8, "For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light." He makes a point of stating that people of the world, i.e. not Christians, are shrewd and clever, and they make plans to make best use of the resources that they've got, even if it's by means that we wouldn't necessarily agree with, to invest in and secure their future. Now, not only that, but he then emphasises that they are more shrewd than people of the light, i.e. Christians. Jesus says this as if we should be learning from the people of the world how to be as shrewd as they are in their use of resources in this life in order to serve God and his kingdom, to invest in our eternal futures with him. Now, I think it might be helpful here to actually understand what the word shrewd means. I think it has quite negative connotations associated with it. If we call someone shrewd, I'm not sure we necessarily think that that is a good thing. So the dictionary definition of shrewd is good judgment of a situation to use it to an advantage. Now, the Message puts these two verses this way. Streetwise people are smarter in this regard than law-abiding citizens. They are on constant alert, looking for angles. I want you to be smart, but for what is right. So there are two main differences, though, between Christians and worldly people. And the first main difference is what our motivation and purpose is for doing so. The steward does what he does in order to get into the good books of the debtors, and he's doing it selfishly to secure his own future. But we don't invest in God's kingdom to get into God's good books. We know that salvation is by grace alone. But in James chapter 2, James says that faith without works is dead. So if we really love Jesus and he's really changed our hearts, then a natural reaction to that is to want to take care of the poor, or to give our time to the lonely, or invest in others, because we want to love as Jesus has loved us, and to give our time and our money to the work of the church, because it's how we show our faith. The second difference, and another point we can take from this passage, is found in verse 9, which is what we actually do with our money. Jesus says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. So what does that mean? Is Jesus saying that we need to use our money to buy friendship, as the steward in the parable might have done to some extent? Well, rather, I think we know that real friendships aren't built on bribery or on tit-for-tat favours. So I think rather than that, Jesus is actually encouraging us to use our money to invest in things that really matter, when everything else fades away, and that is relationships. Relationships where we may be able to share the good news with them, or things that might result in other people joining us in heaven too. And one Bible commentary summed it up quite nicely like this. To gain friends by means of mammon is to use money in such a way that others appreciate you for your kindness and for your generosity. Well, what might that look like? Well, in normal pre and hopefully at some point post-COVID times, that might mean opening up our homes to people, or cooking them a meal, being kind, being generous, showing people that they're important to us and that we value them and spending time with them, and also giving to the church, to charities and other organisations that seek to further the gospel, carry out its works. In the current epidemic, that might mean donating to a food bank or offering to get shopping for a neighbour. Now, I think understandably, given the warnings on Scripture on the love of money, that as Christians we can actually be quite wary of money and business, and perhaps we see it as quite an ungodly thing to pursue wealth in any capacity, in any way, and even perhaps just to be good with money. But I think Jesus here is actually saying the opposite. There's nothing wrong with being wise with your money and your resources to make them go as far as they can, or to return an investment for the future. And in fact, you could argue that it's ungodly not to. I'm aware that in the current time of this coronavirus pandemic, there is so much insecurity around the economy and our jobs that it does seem maybe somewhat ironic and perhaps even insensitive to be talking about how we can best use our money. There will be those who are watching today who will have lost jobs, livelihoods, incomes, futures that they feel they've invested in. And there will be those watching that have struggled even before this pandemic. But it even seems ironic talking about investing in others when we can't even meet up in person. But it's important to remember that this passage isn't just talking about money, and we can still invest in and bless people in other ways. And just remember the meaning of that word shrewdness again. It's making smart decisions. As Christians, we can often be seen as being a bit passive, but I think Jesus here is saying we should be clever and we should be strategic in what we do, and we can do that whatever situation and whatever circumstances we are in. The third point that Jesus then reminds us of in this passage is that we are all stewards of God's possessions on this earth, and we should be trustworthy and responsible with them. Now, our son James has the most uncanny ability to break toys or things that he is given more than anybody I know. When he was a baby and he was given those lift the flap books, we had to put them away till he was about 3 years old because he just couldn't not rip a flap off in his excitement to open it and in his haste. And he wasn't doing it on purpose, and he wasn't being reckless. He just being careless, wasn't really taking care of things. And even now, as he's older, he can break a toy when it's brand new and it's coming out of the box. Just in his haste to open the box, he'll manage to lose something really important. And it has become a bit of a standing joke now in our family. And actually, just this morning, James came up the stairs and said, "Mummy," and my initial reaction was, "Oh, what have you broken now?" But in all seriousness, now he's getting a bit older, we've had to start saying to him, look, if you can't take care of your toys and things you're given, we're going to have to stop buying them for you, or we're not going to buy you as nice things if you can't look after them a bit better. And I think in the same way, God is watching how responsible we are with our possessions and what we do with them. It's a mark of our character and our values. Jesus says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if we have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? We should be honest and responsible in the way that we handle our money, because if we can't be trusted with something that is ultimately as meaningless and insignificant as money, how can we be trusted with true riches, which is a future serving God? The last point to be mindful of is that Jesus warns us how easy it is for money to change from something that God has given us to use well to something that actually enslaves and controls us. Verse 13 clearly tells us that if we are controlled by money, then God isn't our master. Now, I know it is a bit cliche, but whilst I've been writing my talk, I've been quite challenged on my changing attitudes towards money. Zach and I have both been quite faithful tithers throughout our working lives, and even I remember from being 11 years old and having £1 pocket money and faithfully putting my 10p into the church offering. And recently we were talking about this and calculated or estimated how much we had given to the church throughout our working life. And when you do that, it is quite a staggering amount of money. Now, we are in a time of our life where we've got larger expenses because we've got a young family, but we've also got a reduced income, with me being largely a stay-at-home mum. And so we can't help but think what we could have done with all that money, or what we could do with the amount that we tithe each month. We've got some next door neighbours who are in a really similar position in life to us, similar age children, etc. And they have been doing lots of work on their house. They've just had a lovely new orangery built, and they're planning to do a big kitchen extension, doing work on the garden, getting new windows. It looks really smart and it looks really nice, especially next to our house. And we can't help but compare ourselves and say, well, if we weren't giving away this money each month, perhaps we could be doing that. Now, who's my master there when I think like that? I realised that my view of all that money that I've given away had become where I was thinking that money was wasted, it was lost. I could have done something better with it. And the reality is that I should be viewing that spending, the way I choose to give money to the church or to the charities, I should be viewing that in the same way I would view anything that I've gladly chosen to spend my money on. In the same way I would view buying new shoes for the children as a good investment, or the joy I would get from buying several Terry's chocolate oranges when they are on offer in the supermarket. Giving and tithing are good decisions, ones that we choose to do, and we should choose to do gladly, and they will have untold effects that we will never know of, and it's certainly not wasted. There are quite a lot of messages, I think, from this passage. So to summarise, Jesus is telling us to be shrewd and smart in the way we deal and invest in God's kingdom. We should be using our money and other resources well to invest in relationships, and we should be honest and responsible in how we handle it, but being careful not to let it be our master. As one writer puts it, it is a radical call to biblical stewardship in an age of worldly wealth. Now, to finish, I want to share with you the story of a man who I believe really managed to exemplify all of this, John Lang. Now, you might recognise the name Lang from the large construction firm Lang O'Rourke, which are involved in several large construction projects. John built that firm up from being a small family business to being a giant international company that has built houses, power stations, motorways, airfields and Coventry Cathedral. Now, Sir John was a devout Christian and he was a member of the Brethren movement. And quite early on in his life, in his 20s, he made a commitment to God that he would always give and devote a definite portion of his time and his resources to Christian work. I'm going to read you some of the things that are said about him. His Christian faith was the motivation for the company's pioneering concern for the welfare of its staff. A world-renowned builder, he was ahead of his time in many innovations and developments which directly benefited both his employees and his business. He was among the first to give holidays with pay, a company pension, bonus payments, payments by results, and to introduce many schemes which became standard in the construction industry. He encouraged shareholding by employees. He helped fund the UCCF movement, built churches, pastors' homes, and theological colleges all for free. The list goes on about his accomplishments, and there are still charitable trusts in his name and in his family's name. When John died in 1978, aged 98, his firm was worth millions and millions of pounds, but his own estate was worth a mere £371. Another writer says this: he was a captain of industry who made a fortune, but asked only for the simplest of lifestyles, a philanthropist who gave away his fortune. The scope and full extent of his giving will never be known. In his personal life, he was free from ostentation. In a materialistic society, he was a man who gained glittering prizes and refused the glitter.
A little while ago, I was introduced to a program called The Repair Shop. I don't know if you've heard of it before or seen it. If you haven't, I can highly recommend it. It's a program where people take their treasured objects, which have seen better days, and they take them to the repair shop to be restored to their former glory by a group of experts. The compelling part of the show, however, is that each object has a story, which evokes strong and important memories in their owner. It's not so much the objects that matter, but the memories they provoke which count. We're going to take this time to celebrate communion together. So if you need to pause the video to get the things you need to join in, please just do that now. And why do I mention the repair shop? It's just because it's a program that reminds me about how powerful memory can be. And as we do this ritual of drinking the wine or whatever drink you drink and taking the bread, God gave us one command: do this in remembrance of me. God knows that remembering is important for human beings. And as we're called to remember and often what Jesus did for us, it helps us make sense of today, and it helps us have hope for the future. So let us just remember what Jesus did for us now. Maybe if you're lonely today, you need to remember the loneliness that Jesus faced as the disciples left him to face the cross alone. If you're in pain today, maybe remember the pain and the suffering Jesus went through for you. If you've been betrayed or wrongly treated, remember that Jesus was betrayed and wrongly accused for your sake. Above all, let's remember today the first time that we realised that Jesus went to the cross for us and how it made everything new. So I'm just going to read from 1 Corinthians chapter 11, starting from verse 23. For I received from the Lord what I passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it, in remembrance of me." We're going to take a short time now to pray and thank God for all that He's done for us. Who has believed this message, Lord? To whom have you made yourself known? When you came to earth, you grew up like a tender shoot, a live root out of barren ground. You did not use looks or status to attract us. Nothing in your appearance made us want you. You were hated and rejected by us, a man of suffering, well acquainted with pain. We did not care for you. We were not impressed. But certainly it was our pain you took, our suffering you bore. In ignorance, those who saw you die thought the punishment was yours. Not at all. It was for us you were pierced, and our wickedness which crushed you. That punishment paid for my peace. Those hits and blows purchased my healing. Throughout it all you were silent. Even as they led you away, you did not speak up once. Did anyone try to defend you? Instead, you were assigned a place with the criminals, though you had done nothing wrong and told no lies. Yet all of this you chose. But why? Because you knew you would see a harvest of souls, spiritual children which you have chose. Now you see and are satisfied. Praise God, Saviour of my soul.
Thank you for watching today's service. I hope whether you're new or part of our wonderful church family that you loved it as much as we did. Thank you to everyone who's been involved in today's service. It has been such a blessing with all of you giving up your time to touch our hearts in each of our homes. I hope that we're all blessed and challenged to walk out what we have heard. I pray God's peace, love and courage as we do this. If you'd like to know more information about the church family, Alpha, or anything else that you've listened to on today's service, or if you simply would like to talk to someone, please email respond@oakenbaptist.org.uk and one of our team would love to get in touch with you. May the Lord bless you and keep you this coming week. Bye.